First and foremost, hello and welcome everyone to our Liberal Breakfast this morning, co-hosted with Liberty Global on the intersection between the green and digital transition. Before I introduce our panel for this morning, I would like to remind everyone to please ask questions throughout the discussion, either by using the Q&A function here on Zoom, or if you are joining us via Facebook Live by using the comment section. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our panel for this morning. Moderating our event today is Jennifer Baker. Better known as Brussels Geek, Jennifer has been a journalist in print, radio, and television for 20 years, with the last 10 plus years specializing in EU policy. She has worked across a wide range of media, from editing a national daily paper in Malta to reporting on European affairs for Middle Eastern television, and has a wealth of experience in navigating the political quagmire of the EU. Regularly listed as one of the top influencers in the EU bubble, Jennifer was awarded the #1 tech influencer in 2019 by ZN, was listed by Politico as one of the top 20 women shaping Brussels in 2017, and was named by Analytica as one of the world's top 100 influencers on data security in 2016. She is also a GLG Expert Council member, providing advice on EU policy, and was an original member of the Expert Council of the Good Technology Collective. Jennifer regularly features as an EU expert on BBC Radio, Euronews, Sky News, and others, and hosts Brussels' must-watch weekly roundup show, TOTW for Euractiv. She has written for some of the biggest names in media, including Ars Technica, Computer Weekly, The Next Web, and The Register. Next, we are joined by Manuel Kohnstamm, who is the Senior Vice President and Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at Liberty Global. He is responsible for developing and implementing Liberty Global's regulatory strategy, public policy, government affairs, and corporate communications. Mr. Kohnstamm joined the Europe operations of Liberty Global's predecessor in September 1999 and was appointed to his current position in January 2012. From 1992 until he joined Liberty Global, Mr. Kohnstamm worked at Time Warner Incorporated, most recently as Vice President of Public Affairs in Brussels for its subsidiaries. Prior to joining Time Warner, Mr. Kohnstamm worked with the consulting group European Research Associates in Brussels, where he conducted macroeconomic and policy studies on the telecommunications and defense industries. Mr. Kohnstamm is also a member of the supervisory boards for both VodafoneZiggo and the Telenet Group Holding NV, which is a subsidiary of Liberty Global. Mr. Kohnstamm is also a member of the board of directors of Sunrise Communications Group AG, a Liberty Global subsidiary in Switzerland. Mr. Kohnstamm is co-chair of Giga Europe, an industry association bringing together independent private telecoms companies. In addition, Mr. Kohnstamm is a trustee of the nonprofit organization Street Child, a charitable organization focused on improving the lives of some of the poorest and most vulnerable children in the world. Next, we are joined by Svenja Hahn. Svenja is a first-term member of the European Parliament for the German Free Democratic Party, part of the Renew Europe group in the European Parliament, and first vice president of the European Liberal Forum. Svenja is a member of the Committee for Internal Market and Consumer Protection, where she especially focuses on AI legislation. She is also a substitute member in International Trade Committee, where her focus has been on South and Southeast Asia, responsible business conduct, and the circular economy. Furthermore, she is Renew Europe coordinator in the Special Committee on Artificial Intelligence in the Digital Age, which was established in 2020. Svenja is also a member of the delegation to ASEAN and South Asia and a substitute member of the delegation to Australia and New Zealand. She is a member of several parliamentary intergroups, such as the LGBTI intergroup, the Disability intergroup, the Anti-Racism and Discrimination intergroup, the intergroup of Seas, Rivers, Islands, and Coastal Areas, the Spinelli group, and the SME intergroup, as well as the Working Group on Responsible Business Conduct and the Youth Interest Group. Prior to becoming an MEP, Svenja was the president of the European Liberal Youth, better known as LIMEC, from 2018 to 2020. And before that, she served as the press officer and then the vice president of the organization. So thank you all so much for joining us this morning. We are so happy to have you. And now, Jennifer, I will turn it over to you to get this discussion going.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Good morning to everyone. I think we've got a big topic to try and cover in just 1 hour. So again, to reiterate what Natalie said, please do try and send your questions in right from the beginning so we can get to as many as possible. But to allow both our panelists to set out their view and their vision, let me ask a general opening question, which is that the new Green Deal is one of the key agenda points for the European Commission, alongside Europe Fit for a Digital Age. So these are two key policy areas. And what I'd like to know from a panelist is what is the greatest barrier to achieving a green digital Europe? Svenja, let me start with you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. And you're actually already hitting it on the spot there. I think the biggest obstacle we have to reach a sustainable and digital Europe is still the fragmentation of our single market. And we have many harmonized sectors, but there are still national exceptions and partly artificial barriers, for example, when it comes to the free movement of services. And some sectors are still very far away from harmonization. National fragmentation leads to limits for innovation and competition because new innovative products have trouble scaling up. And barriers within our EU market create burdens for businesses, slow down the processes towards more digitization and sustainability. And I'm actually very concerned to see that member states put forward their own national legislation, not taking into account what is actually currently happening on a European level. And my native country of Germany is very active in that field after sleeping for decades. And they're pushing for unilateral national initiatives on digital strategies and on sustainability and creating legal uncertainties for businesses and consumers alike. What will be the situation? What will come from Europe? Will this all change now in a few years again? So I think what we really need is a true single market for digital, like a digital union, a digital single market, because only harmonized rules will make Europe and make the EU the most innovative single market in the world. And that is crucial to become sustainable, to become digital, to be leading innovation, and as well to combat climate change successfully. So if we're honest and we mean it, we want to turn the European Green Deal from a nice headline into reality. One of the main instruments will be digitization. And that can only work through harmonization. I think that's why we're very, very keen on looking to the Digital Service Act, the Digital Market Act, which is supposed to be launched next week. And then finally the rumors come into reality, and we see what's actually in there in that package. So I think there are quite some issues we need to work on, but the most pressing thing really emphasize and create a digital single market.
Manuel, same question to you. Do you agree with Svenja, or do you see other things as being larger barriers from your perspective?
No, I think I generally agree, Svenja. It's the European single market is a great project, has great advantages for everyone, but it's not completed yet. And there are many areas where it is not a reality today, where we do see. Unfortunately, there are a number of areas even where you see an increasing fragmentation because national regulators and national political leaders have been given quite a bit of freedom to diverge on some of the key aspects of policy making. So I completely concur that that should remain one of the most important kind of driving forces of policy making and one of the most important incentives for certainly the European institutions to go after. In addition, I would say there is also in certain sectors a continued tendency, and that's a little bit inherent in the European system, to micromanage certain industries, and that's born out of the desire to harmonize everything, to look at everything that's being regulated in all the member states, to throw it all in one big pile and then see what's the common denominator, and then throw that all back to all the member states. That mechanism, there was a time when there was a very strong test, what regulation is really necessary and what can be left to the market. And we should continue to look at that principle forbearance, how much regulation is really necessary, because that is one of the pitfalls of the European regulatory framework. Sometimes we're overdoing it a bit and go too much detail.
Well, how interconnected are the two areas? Svenja, you alluded to that, but is there a danger of focusing too much on one at the expense of the other? These are big transitions that the Commission and the political will seems to be behind at the moment. So do they depend on each other, or are they separate? Or can you talk to me about how they link into each other, please?
Well, I think they're deeply interconnected. digitization can very much support the green transition, and both our priorities when we talk about how are we putting our economies back on track. And I think one needs to be thought with the other, because I mean, we're basically seeing it now, that not just doing things is not going to combat climate change. Not just staying at home, not flying is not going to be enough. So what we really need is innovation to still have a good life, to that people and countries that are yet not where we in the EU are, that are striving for something better, want to get to. So we need to get there through innovation. So I think Green Deal and digitization are deeply interconnected. There's no green transition without digitization. And like looking at this, for example, I mean, now we're all meeting over Zoom and we're deeply hoping to meet in person again, but I'm pretty certain in the future, we think twice if we really need to travel for this one meeting, and maybe then do it online. And for example, digitization and especially artificial intelligence in the agriculture sector, which is a very big contributor to carbon emissions, for example, or greenhouse gas emissions, digitization and AI can help to save energy, save water, save fertilizers or other resources through tailored individual solutions. And I'm coming from a harbor city in Hamburg, and I already see examples there how smart management through AI technologies make trade and logistics more efficient, more resource effective. So, but I think it's important to keep in mind that actually, well, of course, digitization has a price to pay as well. Many technologies consume a lot of energy, have a very poor carbon footprint, such as blockchain, for example, that demands huge server capacities. And I think therefore we as well need to have a look into the details and improve sustainability of digital technologies, like, running digital system with renewable energies. Actually, if I may, we're actually having a hearing with the AI committee on this topic on the 27th of January. So if someone's interested in that, you're very much invited to join that as well. Sorry for the advertisement.
Well, that's fine. I'm sure people watching are indeed interested in that. Manuel, will you pick up on that? I mean, we hear often these sort of crazy figures and analogies thrown around about how much energy blockchain is, it's always the example, consumes. Are there areas where, where the private sector needs to improve, or should the public sector be working more closely with the private sector to ensure that digitization is green?
Now, obviously, it's a very significant target of the digital sector to keep that in mind. We are as a broadband provider, we're rolling out these gigabit networks throughout Europe with lots of not only connectivity but also processing capability. And with that comes indeed energy consumption, and we're doing everything we can, not only from an environmental perspective but also from a pure cost control perspective. And so there is a certain element of self-regulation indeed going on in the industry. But we also want to make sure that we're complying with science-based targets to reduce greenhouse gases. We committed to reduce our emissions by a minimum of 50% by 2030 and by 80% by 2050. We're introducing special chipsets that require fewer cooling devices. We are also trying to minimize the energy consumption on the terminal equipment that comes into the consumer homes. So I think all industry has a responsibility here, and we definitely take our part here. We also we shouldn't rule out that this is not just about technology and regulation. This is also about business opportunities. And to give you one example, the Liberty Global kind of cable network, fiber and coax cable network that stretches out throughout Europe through millions of homes. We are now starting to see the opportunity that we have with street cabinets that we power everywhere in throughout Europe. And we have set up a separate department called Liberty Charge, which essentially converts those street cabinets into electric car powered charging stations. So, you have to keep looking for business opportunities during the green transition as well, and see where digitization and the green transition can meet. And we do that every day.
I mean, so it's about innovation and sustainability. I've heard you mentioned cooling, which is one of the big areas, certainly for data centers, that they can somehow channel that into other uses as well, the heat that they generate. So coming back, go back one step, Svenja, you mentioned us working from home, and of course that is the norm now. I mean, do you think, as many say, crisis is the mother of invention, that this COVID crisis has taught people to live and work in different ways and use digital technology in a way that is going to be sustainable going forward? Or is this just a hiatus and we will all go back to driving polluting cars, taking too many planes?
Well, I personally certainly hope that we're going to be able to travel again in the future, but I think we should look at what do we want to stay, what is good, and maybe what do we don't want to stay, where do we want to go back to. I'm pretty sure what will stay is we're going to have more digital meetings, we're going to have more work from home. There's going to be improved digital processes of working. I'm fairly certain that as well the look of our cities will change when more people stay at home. I mean, in Brussels, unfortunately, many places and restaurants had to give up because no one was working in that area anymore. No one's actually living in that area, so no neighbors frequented those places. So I think maybe that will change as well to change how our cities will look like. And but I think we need to talk about long-term how this works. I mean, I'm currently sitting in my kitchen, and I'm pretty sure quite some other people are doing that. And I think we need to talk about how can this work in the long term, so it's actually for benefits of people. We need to face shortcomings, we need to face challenges, we need to talk about how can this work on a flexible basis, how can we especially support people, for example, with children working from home. So this new work is kind of like suddenly became pushed into reality, and everyone is kind of struggling to figure that out. And I think, of course, me from the perspective as a lawmaker, though this is not European competence, of course, having a perspective like, how can we ensure that everyone has the framework to work from that it's working from home as possible, that you can work from your companies? How can employers support the employees with the right equipment? And for example, when I'm at home in Hamburg, it's I'm sorry, but pain in the ass to have video conferences. I live in the city center of Hamburg, but there is no broadband. And the lack of broadband cables, the mobile standard stacks we're having throughout the EU, and the inequalities there is a big issue. So actually, digital infrastructure is gonna become more urgent in the future now than it was even before.
Well, you've actually
perhaps, Jennifer,
I was going to go to you next, Manuel.
Chip in on that. A lot of companies, and our company included, but a lot of companies across Europe have learned very, very quickly this year. And I think we generally try and talk more about flexible working structures rather than just working from home, because I think we are going to see a new modality in the way we work and the way we active in the office. Our company VodafoneZiggo in the Netherlands and Telenet in Belgium, by the way, have both officially announced to their workforce that they going forward post the pandemic, they will work flexibly in such a way that you're required to be at the office a minimum of between 40 and 50% of time. And at the rest it's not your individual decision, but it's a team, it goes into team decisions and into collective responsibility of manager and employees and teams to make that new way of working come to life. Offices will change very different, they will become very different. Offices, whichever offices still consisted of cubicles of people working in individual cells, that's no longer going to happen. These will be collaborative working spaces, and you come to work to jointly work on collective projects and products, and you work remotely, and that doesn't always have to be at home, by the way, right? So you could very well see that you see in the future some of those, Svenja, there's restaurants and bars that you described that are empty now that those become collective working spaces where people kind of meet and get together on individual basis and two or groups or whatever, or work by themselves. And so that's absolutely true that for that kind of a society with that kind of a digital flexibility, you need, full-fledged, not only broadband, high-speed broadband, fiber connections and high HFC networks, but also good 4G or 5G mobile networks, because people need to be able to work wherever they are, whenever.
Well, as a follow-up, Manuel, on that, because Svenja was just getting to a point that I think has been raised by one of our audience members, which is about getting fiber networks out into the population in small towns. They're asking about there. So, I mean, there's this question of, rural versus city divide. I mean, do you perceive, Manuel, that to be an issue? I mean, what if there isn't really a business case for supplying to a really remote area? Do we run the risk of some citizens being left behind?
Well, obviously, that's something we need to keep an eye on. It varies a lot per country and per region in Europe. I'm very sorry to hear, Svenja, of Hamburg. If we would have had an operation in Hamburg, we would have made sure that you had the right broadband connections. In the Benelux countries where we're active, we are already capable of delivering gigabit speeds even to very remote kind of rural communities. But that's because it's a small, kind of relatively small and densely populated country. Within countries like France and Spain and Italy, with more stretched out rural areas, I think you will see a combination of activities. On the one hand, we do need to continually roll out of very high speed networks, whether that's a combination of fiber, HFC, or others. But you will also see more extension of a mix of technologies with fixed wireless. The 5G in that sense has a potential, and 4G as well. Further rollout of covering those areas which are not always economically reachable. Because some of the furthest islands in the North Sea, or some of the most remote spots in the middle of Spain, it will be very difficult to see how they will be connected by cables. But mobile and the advanced mobile technology can make up for a lot here. So you will see a mix of technologies, and I think all telecom operators in Europe are incented to accelerate the investments that are ongoing right now. And also the good thing you see now is that regulators are seeing that it's necessary to go to a next wave of infrastructure investments. And Melanie Dawes, the chief executive of the UK regulator Ofcom, has made a very strong speech last week just to say just that. She said the next 10 years should be about infrastructure incentives for the broadband builders of Europe.
Svenja, let me ask you then, coming back to economic recovery, how important are these two targets in order for Europe to benchmark itself against the rest of the world, particularly in light of the COVID pandemic and an uncertain economic future?
I think what's very important is that we have sufficient investment and a good, clear EU-wide framework. I mean, if we're looking at the EU budget, which is still a very hot topic this week, but the Commission announced that they're going to put 30% of the recovery fund Next Generation EU into green transition and 20% into digitization. I think that really shows where the money is, the priority is. So I think that is some good news, though I must say I would have wished for more than 20% for digital, and especially a step back from the cuts the council made for a budget on digitization in the summer. So I think there should have been even more, and it's important that we get better cooperation between the EU and the member states on this issue. But of course, funding and budget is only one aspect. as said before, there will be no successful green transition without thorough digital innovations. And that's what we need to create for a more innovation friendly mindset in the EU. And if we look at the member states, we have very different levels of digitization and very different approaches. When we talk about what we can regulate on the EU level, then we're talking about harmonization. And for example, if we're looking to other countries, especially it's always the US where we see like this clash, EU versus US when it comes to tech. And we're seeing now that the EU has some protectionist tendencies towards tech companies from the US. And I think we need to come into a mindset where we achieve a more competitive advantage, where we're not just talking about taxing US companies. I think we need to focus more about what we can do to thrive innovation in the EU. And that is, of course, reducing bureaucratic burdens for businesses, especially startups and SMEs. We need to create a level playing field for smaller players so they can actually compete with in a fair way with big tech giants. And I'm very hesitant towards especially ex-ante regulations. So again, going to be very interesting with the Digital Market Act, because it's hard to foresee any potential problem that might occur in the future. So it's actually going to be very, very interesting. I see some good steps ahead. Gaia X is a very interesting project, but like one state-financed cloud system will not solve all the issues, but it's going in a direction. And I think we need to work on our regulation, on fostering innovation, and especially working on our mindsets and on skills for Europeans in the future.
I mean, do you think these sorts of, we've seen Gaia X is getting some funding. Do you think these sorts of funding and innovation sort of promotion resources should be tied to obligations on green? Svenja. Yeah.
Well, I certainly think when states put money somewhere, they as well put priorities with that as well. I think we just need to be realistic in what can we achieve and what can we ask for, especially when we talk about public procurement. I think there are a lot of requests to overhaul that. So I think we carefully need to look at what can be realistically achieved. And if we do something like that, we need to have a clear checklist so that in every little town hall where an employee then has to bring this actually to life, it's actually feasible and doable. And what I'm really hoping for is that we make our way to really market-based approach in combating climate change, and not as we sometimes see it falling back to, okay, we just put money on that, we just forbid. But what we've seen, what the most efficient way was so far, was the emission trading system, which is a market-based approach that has yet been the most successful way in reducing carbon emissions. So I think this really needs to be a priority.
Manuel, same sort of question for you regarding funding. Do you think that, well, as Svenja said, 20% doesn't seem like a lot of the recovery funds budget. Do you think there does need to be more investment? We're looking at public-private partnerships, and should any support come with strings attached in order to make things a bit more green, as we want to say, or environmentally less damaging?
Well, first of all, 20% of a huge number is still a huge number, right? So I don't think anybody is suggesting that that's not enough money. There is a lot of money going into infrastructure investment, and that's good. Secondly, I would say states always need to be super careful when they're funding these kind of projects, that they're not distorting the normal private process, right? Because the lion's share of all the investments, of all the kind of billions and billions and billions of investments in infrastructure, certainly in the communication space, in broadband super high networks, in 5G mobile networks, will come from the private sector. And so you need to be super careful as a state authority to start pumping money in to compete with those kind of private investments, because you take away the risk return ratio from the private investors. So that's thing number one, that always needs to be super carefully observed. And we have a good system in Europe where the European Commission has identified kind of the European regions into what's called black, gray, and white zones, where the white zones are the ones which are really in need, because they are completely devoid of any meaningful broadband coverage whatsoever. And so as long as the funding is designed to serve those white areas, it works well. And we and other operators will definitely be interested in kind of in executing some of that work. The strings attached, the good news about the broadband industry, certainly the digital industry, it's not very polluting. You said it yourself. I mean, the carbon footprint of the sector actually starts when you're actually using the networks, when you're using, and indeed, I think there needs to be some, care and attention for the data centers, the cloud, industry, if you see what I mean, because that's definitely a big energy consumer, and we've seen that in a number of countries where some of the biggest data centers have indeed started to invest themselves into green energy to supply their own energy in a carbon efficient way. There's some massive wind parks in the north of Europe that are now being built purely to power those kind of stations. But I think the building of the networks themselves, fortunately, is a very environmentally friendly kind of operation. And we do it with a minimum of disruption for people, for the environment. It goes, we have all kinds of techniques like micro trenching, where you literally go through a street almost in an invisible way and laying those new cables. So I think the carbon footprint of the networks themselves is limited. I think definitely in the use of the networks, in particular in the data center space, there's I would agree. A certain level of obligations would be in line.
Well, let me follow up on that with a question from Javier Stevens, who's asked that knowing blockchain technology, we know it's very inefficient to the point of energy consumption, which I think this goes to your point regarding data centers as well, can be a bit energy inefficient. However, many companies and also European governments sell it as a solution to problems. Do you think this is a lack of knowledge or just a bad way in promoting innovation using only one word? So I really want you to sort of address whether there's a lack of knowledge or whether we're not giving out the right information for people to understand what's actually happening in terms of use in the network or data storage.
Question to me,
yes,
Jennifer?
and then to Svenja.
Yeah, well, I think one of the solutions really is, just as in the normal physical industry, we do try to get production closer to consumption, right? One of the objectives of a greener method of production is to not produce everything on the other side of the planet, having raw goods traveling and so forth around the planet and getting it back to where it's actually being consumed. I think in a similar way, you will see a race towards computing and data storage closer to where it's actually being used. So you will see more opportunities for edge computing rather than for big, massive data centers that serve the whole world in one location on the planet. So there is going to be a bit more of a distributed system. It comes with the growing pains of this industry, but that's ultimately where we end up.
Okay, Svenja, another question has come in from Anonymous, who said, it would be nice to hear more about the energy efficiency and circularity in industry. How will policymakers envisage, what will policy envisage as a way to incentivize green behavior? I suppose if we were saying you don't want too many strings attached to, to innovative funding, how do you incentivize that green behavior?
I think what we're having currently in the Parliament as well is a discussion about how should we make that possible. And well, some colleagues certainly tend towards a more planned economy approach, and I'm all for a market driven approach. But in that as well, of course, we can set a framework and we can make it easier to make sustainable decisions. And for example, I was working as well on the trade committee on the matter of circular economy, because there are still barriers. We can tear down barriers. We can make it easier to have trade in recycled goods. First and foremost, we need to agree on common standards on recycled quality, on end of waste criteria, and to really enhance that and make it easier. And of course, how to ensure safe standards when maybe this is a product that's now recycled from times from when before we had the standards. What are we applying? So there are a lot of like regulatory questions, but of course we need to talk about how do we make it easier for consumers to make a good decision. And that is first and foremost about informing consumers and making very clear which standards apply and what quality there is in this product. And for example, as someone that still travels at least between Germany and Belgium, I'm always struggling with just very simple with my PET bottles, which I always have to take back to recycle in Germany because it's different pound systems. This is just a small example where we could get better on a European level.
Manuel, in terms of consumer behavior, do you think there's a point where customers will say, I will choose this provider rather than that provider because I know that they've got these green policies? Do you think there is a business case there?
Oh, absolutely, and it's already happening. It's already happening big time. I mean, in our industry and in a lot of industries, and it's not just about the green credentials of companies. It's about their whole purpose, right? And their whole governance model that companies demonstrate in terms of their focus on green technologies, their focus on equality, diversity, their focus on social projects. It has become an integral part, and very hard to underestimate that, to overestimate it. Sorry. Also, younger generations really choose their products and services with that in mind, in a much stronger way than ever before. The same way, we notice that new recruits choose the companies they want to work for based on those kind of performance criteria, and we're deeply aware of that, and hence we are embedding these performance criteria into our company purpose more than ever before. And so, frankly, I personally, I don't believe there's a lot of incentives needed from government on this, because it's happening already, and consumers, employees, other stakeholders, they vote with their feet, and they will be forcing companies to move in this direction.
Okay, thank you for
governments
that.
can do that. Sorry.
Yep.
So what you can do is to create transparency, to make it visible, and to ensure that people have the right tools to make those kind of decisions. But ultimately, I think this is going to be driven by the forces of the market.
Thank you very much for that. I want to remind our audience that if you are following along on the Zoom platform, use the Q&A function to ask questions. It's at the bottom right of your screen, and you can use the chat function for comments. So please do keep chat for comments and Q&A for questions. Obviously, to those following along on the Facebook Live platform, you can use the comment section to do both, and we will filter those through. I'm going to go now to a question from another audience member, Pastel Koenig. I think this is probably more for you, Manuel, because I think it's probably a little bit related to Liberty Charge. One of the greatest issues for the wider rollout of e-mobility charging stations is the older, outdated power network grid, which today often cannot handle the charging of electric cars at private homes or simultaneously at high speeds at public charging points. How could digital technologies help to optimize this situation?
It's a very good point. It's the situation is different in many different countries, right? The power grids themselves, so the power companies themselves need to optimize their grids. The grids also, were originally designed to be like a tree and branch system, and they will become much more of a distributive system. Also, because we see, the future perspectives of, for instance, car charging is in a way where all these electric cars that are being charged also serve as battery stations for the grid as a whole. So the storage is distributed across the whole network. So you need an intelligent system across the whole nation. I think that is definitely one of the key challenges, and should also be a very significant opportunity for the recovery fund funds. What we are doing is, I will not overstate it. We are not a big player. We are an innovator. We're trying to come up with an intelligent solution, but it could eventually develop into something bigger. The advantage that we have is our HFC networks are designed in such a way that power systems run simultaneously with the networks themselves. So we have a fairly fine grid of power supply, and that can be used to some extent. It will require upgrading and improvement of the capacity of those networks, because indeed, certainly today's electric cars are very, very power hungry, need very high capacity charging capabilities. But you can also see that also in that part, there will be innovation going forward. The future, there will be more opportunity for cars that can more efficiently deal with lower capacity networks. So I think everybody's doing everything they can, Jennifer. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Everybody makes his contribution, but I do agree that the upgrading of the European power grids is going to be a significant priority going forward.
Svenja, I think this next question, again from Mr. or Ms. Anonymous, is probably directed at you, because of your comments regarding market incentives to make companies greener. But they're suggesting that things like the digital product passport and the common charger, with things like that, surely they don't need the market incentives as well if you make those sorts of things obligatory.
Well, I'm a bit hesitant for that. The Parliament's position is in favor of a common charger, but innovation should not be hampered. I certainly agree that from a consumer perspective, that would be easier to have a common charger standard. But the industry already themselves reduced the amount of different chargers already heavily in the last 10 years. So I see there would be something good, but actually it's not yet clear how can we ensure that without hampering innovation. Will there then be an agency that will allow new chargers in or not? So I see positive things, but I'm kind of still skeptical how this could really look in practice. But it's a very symbolic discussion and this topic. And then the question of digital product passports. It's a discussion that's always coming up, especially for me as I'm working in sustainable trade area as well. For example, when we're talking about due diligence, where there's supposed to come a legislation next year as well from the Commission, there's often a talk about how can we use that. Digital product passports can, of course, be fitting for highly complex products, especially for very resource and energy intense products, especially when it comes to communication technology, when it comes to high energy or material consumption. But we really need to look into where would this make a difference. I don't think that this is per se the solution to everything. And I see this demanding a digital product passport for all nitty-gritty kind of things. So we need to find a balance where we need information for transparency and where it's only increased bureaucracy. So we really need to look, where does it really make a difference? And it's not a general solution to the issue. But of course, as a consumer, you need to be informed of the carbon footprint of a product you're about to consume or not to consume.
I think it naturally leads on to a question regarding waste, the amusingly named WE directive on electronic waste. Are we due for a review of that? Do you think that those sorts of issues should also be built in, Svenja?
Electronic waste is a big topic, and it's actually a big trade topic as well, because still hazardous material is exported outside of the EU. And I think our goal should be to increase recycling rates inside the EU, but we should not turn into some form of waste protectionism, because we cannot ignore the fact that waste as well is a trading good and recycled goods as well. But we need to look into the standards, and we cannot just ship our waste, especially electronic waste, to other countries, where then the valuable parts are kind of like harvested in an unsafe way. So we need to increase our recycling standards in the EU, but as well help our trading partners in making their goals towards a circular economy as well.
Okay, Manuel, I'm going to give you this next question. Energy efficiency is key, but what can policymakers do to stimulate access to more renewable energy? So from your perspective, from an industry perspective, could more be done at EU level? Do you need more assistance to gain access to renewable energy, or are things sufficient as they are?
Well, that's a very broad question, Jennifer. But we are trying to use as much renewable energy as we can. Obviously, it all comes down to supply, and there are renewable energy is not abundantly available yet in Europe, right? Anywhere in the world, actually. We will have to do with fossil fuels for quite a bit some time. Wind and solar and water can do a lot, but we will have to supply as well with other forms. I personally believe there is also a window for at least a couple of decades for nuclear energy as a relatively clean and relatively safe method of energy production. But we'll probably need more public debate and more scientific analysis also to make that happen. At this moment, we don't see a shortage of energy. Also, we are not one of the world's biggest energy consumers, so we have the luxury of being able to pick and choose our suppliers. We don't see a big problem here at this moment, but I can see that for other industries that may be difficult.
Well, the EU has set this climate neutral target by 2050 of having an economy with net zero greenhouse gases. So obviously it all plays a part, but do you think the broadband companies can play any sort of role in helping to achieve that target? And how would you get that message across if they can?
Well, and obviously, we talked about it earlier in today's discussion. I definitely think that digitization is going to result in some drastic changes in consumer behavior, in work behavior. You only have to look outside the window. During the pandemic, I don't think there was any country in Europe which had any meaningful traffic jams. The carbon emissions of the cars in Europe have come down drastically, in those years. But also, I think a lot of people have come to realize the benefits of sharing, of the sharing economy, of sharing and a kind of means of transport, and of using bikes and electric scooters and electric cars more than ever before. So I think the digitization, definitely, and the flexibility that it brings, the broadband infrastructures that make people come to virtual workspaces, to virtual social and gatherings all the time, in addition to the physical ones, of course, because we all want to get back to seeing one another, and of course that needs to happen as well. But the alternation and I think it will become a permanent part of our life going forward, and it will certainly help to reduce the carbon footprint of our society as a whole.
Svenja, as a policymaker, do you ever feel that you need more information from innovative companies? Do you feel that they get through to you and your fellow MEPs or possibly co-legislators to make the case for what they can do in an innovative way? Because we do always say that the technology moves far, far faster than the policy making.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, I work in the Committee for Artificial Intelligence, and often when we talk about that, even in the Parliament with many people, the first thing that comes to people's mind when we talk about AI is, I don't know, the Terminator with Arnold Schwarzenegger or something. But in fact, a lot of technology, and especially AI, is already part of our everyday lives. It's just like so convenient that we do not realize that. And I think we need to, increase the general knowledge and general digital literacy in broad society. And we need to talk about what can this really make. And as policy makers, we should not tend to overregulate, or this is something and we need specific laws for this. I think the goal we need to have, and we have to do this in this legislation period, is that we manage to set a broad framework, because for many things there is already legislation. I mean, technology is not coming into like a completely blank space. I mean, this is not Wild Wild West in the digital version. We have already a lot of rules in place. Well, we need to see where do we maybe need to update legislation for specific needs. Where can we set a framework? Where do we set standards and no-goes, for example, in general, without even knowing that technology maybe can do it one day. So what are our standards and framework as a society? And I think that should be the goal. And if we manage to do such a framework as the European Union, and then allow technology and innovation to drive within this framework, I think that would be a huge, huge success for us as lawmakers, and a huge success for the EU.
Well, obviously, digitization and climate change are global issues. You know, the climate change doesn't recognize borders. The internet doesn't really recognize borders. Any innovation developed somewhere will probably spread everywhere eventually. So how does the EU leverage its position in the global market, its values, if you like, to achieve net zero carbon emissions, for example, with innovative solutions to living and society? Are there lessons learned to be from other countries, or is there some sort of agenda setting role that the EU could take on? Manuel, give us your thoughts on that. It's quite a esoteric question, but
no, I think it's a very legitimate question, Jennifer, and you know, I think where the EU is at its best when it formulates very strong general guiding principles. We've seen that in the data privacy environment. You know, there the GDPR directive, there were some very clear, general rules that applied, and when they were enacted and enforced throughout Europe, you have this phenomenon which it's been described by others as the Brussels effect, because global companies had to comply with those rules within the European space. We saw countries outside of Europe, Japan, Australia, Indonesia, others actually copying those elements, because the theory and the general principles were so clear and so logical, actually, that it actually gradually became a world standard. And I think there is that phenomenon in the digital environment where the European marketplace is very, very big, is very relevant. And so when we come to workable, strong principles, market guiding principles, then they will definitely have an opportunity to become effectively world standards. It's where we have, but at the same time, the EU needs to be careful that, as I said before, not to micromanage into too many different kind of tiny little instructions, or into systems that will allow member states to do everybody a little bit different. Because then you lose that opportunity of creating this strong kind of almost export product in a strong way of regulating markets. So I think at the same time, the European regulatory machine is very sophisticated. I think still today is one of the most sophisticated in the world in terms of the level of analysis and intelligent people behind it, and kind of the rigor with which it's been tested. But obviously, we should always be also open to success stories in other parts of the world, and not be afraid to copy those if we see that works better.
Svenja, same question to you. How can the EU leverage its position to see the whole world, if you like, digitized and climate neutral?
Well, I think this certainly goes for cooperation and dialogue. And of course, as a member of Trade Committee, I'm kind of biased, but I mean, trade is the #1 soft power the EU has. And so I think we really should enhance digital trade and standards on digital trades and services in our trade agreements. And I think a big opportunity is actually now with the US, with the Biden administration. And for example, in the AI committee, we're really calling for a joint group of lawmakers and experts from the US and from the EU on forming together a group and setting shared standards on AI that then, of course, hopefully would inspire the rest of the world. So once again, trade is the magic word here.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask you each to give me a magic word to finish up. We're just almost at the end of our 1 hour. It's coming up to Christmas. What is on your wish list for a greener, more digitized world? Manuel, I'll let you go first.
What is on my wish list for a greener and more digital world?
And you can think right outside the box here. I don't mind.
Well, lots of broadband speed, that's for sure. Personally, I like wind. I like sailing and kite surfing, so I like wind.
A hover car,
but I also
perhaps.
know a lot of wind will bring us a lot of energy in energy production.
Okay, and Svenja?
I have a very long wish list. I think first is sufficient digital infrastructure, starting with broadband and 5G. Have open minds and innovation-friendly environment and governments and societies. Have good digital governance, better coordination of governments and ministries. And that would close legal gaps and create a good legal framework for the digital age, and that we're not falling into a digital protectionism.
Great, thank you very much. I think I want completely green jetpacks. I think that would be quite fun.
Ooh, that'd be cool.
Thank you all very much. And thank you also to our audience for joining in today's conversation. I know we didn't get to all your questions, but I think we probably touched on elements of all of them and got to as many as possible in the time allowed. Of course, it's a huge area. We could talk for several hours about this, defining all the different points of what we mean, but I think you've got a really good overview from today's discussion. Thank you to both the panelists, Svenja and Manuel. It's been lovely to speak to you.
Thank you for the moderation.
Thank you. I think we don't have any more Liberal breakfasts planned just ahead of the new year, but keep an eye on the website and follow along on Twitter and the various social media channels to see when the next discussion is coming up, because they are always fascinating. Everybody, I hope you have a wonderful day, and thank you once again to ALDE and Liberty Global for organising today's event.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.